I'm speaking with for Radio Free Eireann, Colin Quinn, who's got a Broadway show called The Long Story Short. It's at the Helen Hayes Theater on 44th Street between Broadway and 8th Avenue, and it's been extended into the month of February because it is just an unbelievable show. Now, in my review on Radio Free Eireann, I said this show could have only been done by somebody born and raised in New York City, to have that type of eye to see the things that somebody that wouldn't be from New York City would see. So it had to be somebody that was born and raised, and in particular in Brooklyn. But Colin, I just wanted to get your background, your Irish background. How far back does it go? Were your parents from Ireland, or where are you born and raised?
I was born and raised in Park Slope, and my parents are from Bay Ridge, and my grandparents are from Ireland, from Belfast.
And have you ever went over and looked up the relations?
I tried to when I went over there, and they never called me back, and it was like 15, 20 years ago.
Yeah, and
walked around the Falls Road like a fool. I almost got killed.
Listen, it would have been different if you're on the Shank Hill Road looking for them, maybe.
Yeah, you're right.
Now, the type of humor you do, you don't see much anymore. So you could say it's ethnic humor, just studying the stereotypes of people. And I think because of a lot of the political correctness going on, that you can't mention some of that, but you still continue to do it, but you're not called a racist.
No.
Which is, it has to be a fine line, isn't it?
I guess, yeah. I mean, I deliberately do it, of course, because, like I say, when I was growing up, everybody was like, it was all mixed. You know, every neighborhood was very, at least Park Slope was very multicultural at the time, and it was, we would just, people would make jokes, like teenage guys make jokes about each other, only we would also talk about ethnicity, things we noticed about each other's ethnicity, and it wasn't, considered like racist or anything like that. And then somewhere, I feel like, somewhere along the line, I feel like people came into places like New York and decided, hey, that's racist. But meanwhile, anybody that I grew up with black, white, Puerto Rican, Chinese, you would just say whatever you wanted. And sometimes people did say things in bad taste, but suddenly I felt like it became considered like, oh, that's offensive, you know what I mean? But not by the people you're talking about.
And even when you went to school, like I went to Catholic school in Queens, the nun or whoever was teaching would ask you, what are you? And you would say Irish, and the other kid would say Italian or Puerto Rican, even though you might not have ever been to that country, but that's how you were described. You know, that's the Irish
they're all
kid.
little minor things. It's not like somebody saying they're a genetic everybody acts like it's suddenly you're trying to sell like Hitler's or Spengler, whatever his name was, with his theory of genetic superiority. All you're doing is pointing out that people's cultures are different,
Now, we've had...
Where'd you go, Marta Christie?
No, I went to St. Margaret's over on Metropolitan Avenue, or just over by St. John's Cemetery.
Metropolitan Avenue, boys.
Yeah.
Right near Christ the King.
That's just up from Christ the King, that's right. That was the great goal as a grammar school kid, was to get to CK and get over to Christ the King. That's if you weren't going to Grover Cleveland in Ridgewood, which was the public school kids, which meant your mother didn't care for you. She sent you to public school instead of Catholic school.
But if she sent you to Grover Cleveland, she probably didn't care for you.
That would
if
be
I recall correctly, that was quite a rough house.
Yeah. Well, that's where I graduated from, and during the time I went, I mean, there was race riots and stuff like that. There wasn't much learning going on.
No.
But some of the frequent guests we have on our show is Dennis Hamill and Pete Hamill.
Oh, yeah.
And I know they're friends of yours, and they're from the same neighborhood, but we had Dennis up describing what it was like for him to grow up in Park Slope, and he always brings up about Hippie Hill in Prospect Park. Right. Now, was that a generation before you? Because it seems, even with your play, The Irish Way, it's still the same type of characters that Dennis grew up with, that you grew up with.
Yeah, but I mean, Hippie Hill, I mean, I guess we were like little kids, but I vaguely remember saying, oh, let's go watch the hippies get naked and, like that. So, I mean, I vaguely remember hearing something like that, you know what I mean? But I guess he's a little bit older than me, but not that much, I don't know. I mean, I'm 51, so it's like, but I mean, yeah. So, I mean, there's still a lot of similar people, sure.
And the running theme through a lot of even what Dennis's life and Pete's Hamill is the drinking within the community and even the drugs. I mean, Pete has the book out, A Drinking Life, which was a bestseller.
Sure.
What was the effect on drinking in your life growing up, and was it just so
everyone doing it that it was just normal when you
Yeah,
were growing
well,
up?
Park Slope used to be. I mean, we lived on First Street. There, on 7th Avenue, there were bars lined from First Street, from 2nd Street, actually 3rd Street. What am I saying? There was a bar on 3rd Street. Then, I mean, it seemed like every block almost had their own little bar. So we had we had the Iron Horse on 2nd Street, the Stack of Barley on my corner, Ryan's, and then the Coach Inn and Snooki's, both with the Garfield. Then there was a place called Mooney's. I can't believe I remember all these names of these places. Then there was Camper Down Elm on Union. Then there was just like a bar in every block. And when we were teenagers, I was very lucky. I had a mustache when I was young, so I could get into the bars,
I know during my time it was always the phony draft card that got you into the bars, but that was part of your life. And reading up on you, like you did a lot of drinking. How did it stop and why?
Well, it stopped because I just kept, I couldn't do anything. When I was drinking, it's like I had jobs. I mean, I used to have jobs as a bartender when I was drinking, and I would come to work late at 5 o'clock. My shift started at 5 o'clock, and I'd come in late. So, I mean, I was just such a wreck. I'd black out. I'd get arrested, wake up in downtown in the, downtown Manhattan and Center Street all the time. So it was like, it was going nowhere. And then finally I just had to quit because it was like, I couldn't function. I didn't start stand-up comedy until I quit drinking.
Right, but did the drinking affect the comedy? I mean, because of the characters you met by bartending and being in the bar and meeting them. Had you been stone cold sober, you probably never would have met some of the people that you describe in some of the plays.
That's probably very true.
You know, but then...
Although I met a lot of people, when I was a little kid, you meet a lot of those crazy characters. You know how it is. A lot of the people you meet when you're like 13 with your friends, you're laughing at some old man, but he's a real character.
Yeah.
I'll never forget one of our neighbors. We thought it was so funny because we had the one mob guy living across the street, and then we had the other, the guy that was kind of resentful of him, who was like a hard-working Italian guy, but he worked for the IRS, and he used to try to impress us kids he'd tell us, like, I'd walk in meanwhile, we're like 12, he goes, I'd walk into the place, and I'd throw my badge out and go, I'm here from the IRS. And we used to laugh. We thought that was so funny because we're 12. We're like, can you imagine him thinking he's scaring people like he's an FBI agent? He's got an IRS badge. Meanwhile, little do we know, he probably scared them more than any FBI guy.
Well, that's how a lot of them went down. It was because of the IRS.
Yeah. So we're like, so there were definitely like local people that we knew over the years. When you forget, at the time, you're kind of laughing at them, but then later you're like, oh my God, that guy was like a really interesting person,
And when you were growing up, were you steered to maybe become a cop or a fireman? Because growing up in Irish-American neighborhoods, that would be the path to go. You get out of high school, maybe do a little time in the service, and you come out, and you get that great city job. No, as you said in one of your plays, the ultimate goal of a city job, when you do have it, is to get 3/4. And you'd have to be involved with that type of culture to even know the lingo of that. But were you steered to become a cop or a fireman?
Not by my parents, but by my grandfather. My parents were teachers, so they were like, you do whatever you want, you know what I mean? But my grandfather used to always tell us to, go to Delahanty's, because Delahanty's was that place where you could actually study. He's like, you got to go to Delahanty's. He used to say it to me all the time. Go to Delahanty's, and this way you study. This way when you take the police test, you'll do, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
You'll do better. But meanwhile, I didn't go to Delahanty's, but I did take the police test, and I got a 96, but they never called me. And I think it's because in those days, I was still drinking, and I feel like they would go to your neighborhood and actually talk to your neighbors back then. I don't think they still do that.
Yeah, no, they still do that type of investigations. They go into the area and try to find out.
Huh?
Yeah, they try to find out your background.
So I think that's what happened. I think they went into the neighborhood, into my block, and all my enemies, which I deservedly had, were like, this kid's a drunk, don't go near him, And I've been arrested a few times by then, so maybe that was it.
Well,
but I actually took that police test and got a 96. I was very proud of myself.
I was going to say, having prior arrests is probably not going to help you to get onto the job. But
they were all, yeah.
But I played a clip there the other week of you talking about the pizzeria and the neighborhood pizzeria and the difference between colonialism and imperialism.
Oh, yeah.
Now, that could only be done by someone living in New York. If you lived in the Midwest, you can't go to Domino's or Papa John's and do that scene. I mean, that scene can only be done
in your local neighborhood pizzeria where you know the guy and where
Right.
you go in there and do exactly what you said, looking
Right.
for the extra pepperoni, the napkins, the extra cheese. But in that, I played that clip, but that wasn't in the show that I saw last week. So how do you replace bits and pieces from the show you did on Bleecker Street to the show now that you're doing at the Helen Hayes Theater?
It goes back and forth a little bit, but that piece, yeah, was one of those things. It's like, I don't know, it's so funny because that's like one of our favorite pieces, you know what I mean? But it's like, I don't know, just things get shuffled, lost in the shuffle during the rewrite and stuff, But, I mean, I love that piece. I'd like to bring it back in some other form,
Yeah, well, you talked about bringing it back another form. I've read that you want to bring back the Irish wake.
I have to bring that back.
Now, what would you do different this time from the last
maybe
time?
I'd find a way to put in a few things like, like you're talking about, things that I've started to realize were so important, but I don't, you know what I mean? Like, I'm not even sure what, but if I sat down with it and really started looking at it, I'm sure I'd see certain things that were, like, important,
Now, the play you're doing now, a long story short, is about the history of world, according to you, from Brooklyn. Now, who wrote the play? Is it just you, or did you have other writers?
No, me.
Just you sitting down and writing.
Yeah.
And one of the main producers of the show is Jerry Seinfeld.
Yeah.
And he's the director and one of the producers. And I listened. I think you were on Howard Stern. You were talking about Jerry Seinfeld coming in and directing you to do this and take this line out and do that line. When does it get to the point where it's no longer your play and it might be somebody else's play? Being it's a one-man show and it's your play.
That's right.
I mean, how much influence can Jerry Seinfeld have, and when do you say, listen, this is now no longer my play anymore?
Yeah, well, exactly. I mean, that's one of the good thing about him is that if we argue, if I go, no, I love that line, he's like, well, don't you want to do this? And I'm like, no. And then we'll argue for a couple of minutes, but then he goes, hey, it's your show, Like he actually says to me, it's your show. He'll argue his point because he really believes this or that, but ultimately he just goes, it's your show.
And why
lets me do it.
And why did he get so interested in doing this? What did he see in it?
He just loves, he's always been like, when I first did Irish Wake, Sanctifying Grace, it was called Seven Sacraments, and I did it in L.A. And Jerry came at the height of his fame, it's like, oh, Jerry's here. Everybody know, I mean, I knew him, but he came, and he's always been such a big, supporter of me doing all this kind of stuff, So it's like, he's been like that from day one.
And do those shows travel well, the real New York-centric type of thing when you do go to L.A. and stuff like that? Because the night I went at the Helen Hayes Theater on 44th Street, it seemed to be a very New York crowd. I didn't see any of the people coming in with the plaid pants or the buses pulling up outside and coming in to see your play. It was, it just looked like a real New York type of crowd.
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm better, definitely. I feel better in New York. Like you said, it's a certain New York thing. And by the way, do people still say pizza parlor?
Yeah, they might say pizza parlor or the pizza place or,
but parlor was one of those words from when we were young, Remember, it was a pizza parlor.
But even the one I go to is on Metropolitan Avenue. We just call it Carlo's, and it's literally fed 3 generations of an Irish Catholic family. And particularly, how it used to be on Fridays, where
exactly.
No meat. So
I remember walking with my father to go get pizza every Friday night.
Right, and that's part of the interaction between the Italians and the Irish and the different types of culture. Now. Also, what I've noticed now, you could be doing comedy at the Comedy Cellar, at Caroline's. You don't get the publicity. The New York Times doesn't go at 2 a.m. to see Colin Quinn doing maybe a killer set at the Comedy Cellar. But now that you are off Broadway and on Broadway, you're getting the interviews like CNN and the New York Times is doing an interview. What is the difference? I mean, you're still Colin Quinn. You're still doing the comedy. But to the mainstream media now, this is important. What he did at the Comedy Cellar, I'm not going down there. But now somehow now you're more important even though you're doing the same thing. Yeah,
I don't know. I think comedy's just always had that thing, which it's always had that thing, but I kind of like that about comedy, too, is that it's always that thing people are like, oh, come on, fuck, they don't take that seriously or whatever. But meanwhile, there's something about that that's kind of good, too, that it never really fits in the system, comedy,
No,
There's something good about that, too.
Yeah. Well, there is something, and maybe you can explain to our audience what is the difference between, say, doing Caroline's and doing this one-man show on Broadway.
Well, the one-man show, you can really work thematically about one subject. Like when you're doing Caroline's, you're doing a comedy club. It's great, but there's also drinking going on. There's people ordering food. You know what I mean? Like it's hard to keep people on one subject focused. Where you know what I mean? So it's like.
And people are more prepared.
Yeah, people are like there to listen and laugh. And in Caroline's, you have to kind of keep grabbing their attention. You know what I mean?
Now, I've really gotten to know you, and I think a lot of people in New York have gotten to know you, is through your interviews with Howard Stern.
Right.
And they're way different than your interview over at NYC with Lenny Lopate and
Sure.
CNN. How do you feel about doing that when you go on to Howard Stern and it's no longer about, say, comedy or humor?
Right.
You're getting into what it was like in your childhood and some of the horrific things that have happened and your craziness on the internet and your marriage and your sex life. I mean, most interviewers would never do that. But how do you feel about doing those type of interviews?
I feel like from day one, I was always like, if Howard could bring it up about himself, I could bring it up about myself. You know what I mean? Like, I always feel like if he wants to talk about that, I'll go as far as he'll go. You know what I mean?
Right.
And one of the ultimate compliments, one time he goes to me, I disclose a lot, but that was ridiculous. And I was like, oh, my God, even Howard Stern was, like, shocked by how much I disclosed. That's bad.
It is, but people then really get to know you personally. You're no longer just the comic at Caroline's or that your whole background and everything that went on.
Yeah, I just don't care about that stuff, you know. It's like, in some ways, it's like, you probably should leave a little bit for the imagination or whatever, you know what I mean? It's definitely the,
Yeah.
But it's like, it's just something about Howard just makes me go, yeah, you know what? I want to do that because he does it, you know?
Now, what do you have planned for the future? Because I just saw yesterday on the internet that the show was extended. And what makes a show extend? I mean, is there a certain limit that you have to hit with ticket sales, or how does that work? Who comes up to you and says, Colin, we're extending?
The producers come up and say it, but you have to hit a certain limit where it's like, okay, this show is doing well enough where we're actually not losing money. We feel like there's potential in January. A lot of shows close in January, so we're keeping it open, you know?
So they really weigh up. It truly is a money thing. You can't just say, oh, well, we like you, we're going to keep it open. But
nobody does that.
No. And Colin, finally, I just want to say, because they're closing in on the 20-minute mark here at WBAI on Radio Free Eireann, could you possibly live anywhere else in the world? Never mind just the United States. I mean, just with your attitude and your observation, could you ever see yourself moving anywhere else?
Honestly, no. But, sometimes I feel like New York is moved.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Well, you just look at Park Slope.
Exactly.
It is
exactly. So I kind of feel weird sometimes. Like, wow, like when they're closing OTB. Like, if all the OTBs really do close, like they keep threatening, that's like a little stupid thing. But it's, you know what I mean? It's another sign or something. You know.
But even the changing of the neighborhoods, Sunset Park is now South, Prospect Park, or pretty soon you're going to be East Williamsburg or South or North Williamsburg. I mean, the way they keep changing the neighborhoods, and I don't know where there is to move now.
I know, and at the same time, it does make a lot of places better. I get it. It's like really, you know what I mean? It's really amazing. Like if you had told me you get on the L train and you get off in past Bedford Avenue, and it's going to be all blonde kids, I would have laughed.
Oh,
when you see it, you laugh.
Colin,
and there's something good about it, but at the same time, you miss the old New York too. You know.
Yeah, but that was I remember growing up where I live in Middle Village. It was all, you could almost say, refugees from Williamsburg and Greenpoint because of the heroin epidemic. They all moved up Metropolitan Avenue to move to Maspeth and Middle Village, and then anytime anybody went down to Bedford Avenue or down to South First or South, it was to cop dope. I mean, that was it.
Right.
Now it's like
gangs over there all over.
Yeah. Now it's hips to heaven with bike lanes, and they have to get over the Williamsburg Bridge.
So funny. And Bushwick, and
Bushwick, that's East Williamsburg. I can tell you now.
I know.
The kids will get in and take a cab, and they go, "Well, I'm going to Williamsburg," and you're going down Broadway. You go, Williamsburg. Well, that ended about 2 miles ago. What do you mean, Williamsburg? I said, "This is Bushwick."
It is funny.
Yeah. Well, Colin, I thank you for coming on, and
Thank you, Jim.
I just feel great. And anytime I can get you up into the studio and take phone calls,
All right.
and do that, because I know you're very busy, particularly on Saturday. How do you do 3 shows, and why is it that you do 3 shows on Saturday?
Well, it's why do you think we do it? Of course, producers want 3 shows, but I mean, but yeah, it's pretty brutal. It's pretty brutal, but I mean, it's worked out so far because then you know how it is. It becomes that point of pride where where you're like Irish, like I could do what you said I can't do it. I could do it,
And do you ever forget any of the lines?
No.
You're just programmed, and that's it.
No, I'm programmed now. Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm like a machine at this point.
And will there be like an HBO special or anything out
It
of
looks
this?
like there's going to be an HBO special. Yeah.
Oh, great. Just from the play itself.
Yeah.
Oh, well,
That'd be good.
I'll be looking forward to that, and just to get the name out and have people, when they come to New York, they don't all have to go see The Lion King or go to see Wicked.
That's
they
right.
can go see a real New York play, and I
right.
would recommend it all to our listeners to get out there and get to the Helen Hayes Theater on 44th Street between Broadway and 8th Avenue and see a true New Yorker, Colin Quinn. Colin, thank you.
Thank you, John.
All right. Let me just...
Take it easy.